Okay, so FinDAC, master muralist, internationally acclaimed artist, man of many muses as well. Thanks very much for joining me. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Now, first of all, as I said there, you've got murals all over the world, and it must be almost like a bit of a whirlwind in a way because you're in such demand and going from place to place. But now you are looking to, I guess, in a way, take stock and present a collection of photos in a coffee table book, essentially, and you're asking people to get in touch with the photos that they've taken as well, aren't you?
Yeah, mainly because when I'm traveling around the world and painting murals, I hop from one place to another. And sometimes I'm on the road for months and months, and my bag is always overweight. And so I generally never bring a full SLR camera with me. And so documenting of my own work has actually been something I've definitely fallen flat on, especially for the last few years. The advent of social media and the fact that like a simple phone photo tells a story has been enough for me, because I don't share my images more than just on like Instagram or Facebook. And I don't, I definitely don't put high resolution photos of my work online, mainly because my work is ripped off enough already without giving someone access to a high resolution photo. But so of course that means that I have very few high resolution photographs of my murals, which means I have to rely on other people to come forward and hopefully share their photos with me. And also, it also gives me an insight into how the different photographers will kind of frame the picture. Because, an artwork is an artwork and a mural is a mural, but actually when you're in the sort of public setting, it's not just about the mural, it's about how it interacts with the environment. And it's also about how the photographer sees it and how they take the photo, because everything from, sunrise to sunset, the light can have an effect, and someone could be passing in front of the mural in a car, and all of those things tell a slightly different story and give a different angle to the work. So I'm quite looking forward actually to seeing what people have come up with. I have a lot of photographer friends, of course, and so they've already sent their stuff through, but I think it's interesting to see how people do their own creation. It's all like they're just using your artwork as the jumping off point for the photograph, but it's what they set up themselves. It's interesting to me.
And is there something about having a solid thing, a document in the book that appeals as well?
Yeah, I mean, the book is something I would have done a long, long time ago if I'd had my own photographs. The job, if you like, of sitting down and collating all the different photographers' photos together in a database, choosing the best ones, that was something I wasn't looking forward to. But I got an assistant this year, a business assistant, and it's one of the tasks that she's doing. She's the one who's going to document everything. She's the one who's essentially going to write the book as well. I mean, obviously the type of photographs we get and the amount of photographs we get will inform what the book is about. I mean, yes, we know the book is going to be about my work, but what stories do we want to tell within the framework of that work? It can depend on the level of photographs that we get. Luckily, of course, I do have photographer friends, so I know that there's going to be a certain amount of exceptionally high quality photographs, but it might not just be photographs of murals. It could be photographs of work in progress. It could be photos of the lifestyle around it, whether it's personal photos of me traveling or hanging out at festivals or at walls, or the way that you interact with photographers or the public. I mean, all of those things, for me anyway, are an interesting side of street art, because it is completely different to being an artist holed up in his studio all the time. So all of those things will dictate what routes we take in terms of the stories that we tell. But essentially, my assistant will be the one telling those stories, by interviewing me or whatever, and then writing it out properly.
And what sort of level of response have you had so far in terms of, contributions?
Oh, really good. I mean, there's so many that we haven't even gone through them yet. because there's no point. We know that the initial idea was to have this book ready for my solo show, which I'm assuming we'll talk about in a bit. But actually, as soon as we started looking into it, we realized that the development time for a book of this nature is like 18 months. And the show is at the end of this year. So we're like, okay, let's just shelve that idea for now, but let's start collating all the images anyway, because, I can post about it on my social media, but there's no guarantee that everyone is going to see that particular post. So what I'm doing is I'm just continually posting about it. Each week, I'll post another photograph of me painting a mural, and I'll tell everybody that, I'm looking for photographs, and hopefully that will kind of like net the majority of people who would have high quality photographs anyway. But I think essentially the actual sitting down and working out what that book is going to be will probably happen after the show.
It's quite it's quite a challenging task to put it.
It's a mammoth task. It really is, because like I was saying to you before we started the interview, it's not just about a picture of a mural, because everyone will take the picture of that mural in a different way. So we might have 20 pictures or photographs of a particular finished mural, and we have to sift through all of them to find out which one is the best, and which one is the best to use in context of what the story is that we're telling. And then, of course, you also have photographers who come while you're painting the mural. And personally, for me, I actually prefer those photographs, those kind of like action shots, if you like. Not there's much action going on, it's just watching paint dry, but you know what I mean? I just really like those kind of work in progress things.
And I guess, people take their own, I guess not necessarily meanings from the artwork, but I suppose for you, each artwork has, you like looking at this one behind me here, your collab with Christina Angelina in Los Angeles. I imagine there's of course there's a story behind that. So when you look at each individual, it's probably triggering lots of different, memories as well, is it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the reason why I tend to stay on the road for so long. I mean, that for me is the interesting part of being an artist. I hate being studio bound. I know that I've probably produced my best work in the studio, but the actual production is not as enjoyable as painting a wall at all, regardless of having the home comforts or whatever you want to call it. For me, being on the road is like the ideal.
So why is that then, and why street art, and what is it about that you love?
Well, for me, it's because I love travel. I mean, before I became an artist, I had done the sort of whole backpacking thing. And I like sort of getting in touch with different cultures and different ethnicities. And I also like the fact that, when you're a tourist, you're witnessing a certain side of a country or a culture that country or culture wants you to see. But when you're a street artist, you're going to a particular country or a particular city, and you're hanging out with locals. You're getting a local view of their reality, if you like. You're not getting a kind of pastiche or sort of a holiday camp version of that country or city. And the fact of the matter is that I wouldn't have visited half the countries or cities that I've been to if I hadn't been a street artist. So taking advantage of the fact that I can go to another country or city and paint a mural, I mean, of course, I'm going to do that every time, because the more countries and the more places I visit, I think the more rounded a person that you're going to be, because when you're traveling, you do have to consider the fact that we're all raised in different ways. English people are a certain type of breed, and that's because that's how we're raised. But, when you go to France, people say that French are rude, but they're really not. It's just a different way of interacting with people that they have. And you see it in basically every different culture in every country. And you have to be, sympathetic to the fact that people relate to others differently. And the better you are at understanding and sort of like changing the way you behave according to that, the better off you're going to be, because you have less of a chance of one, upsetting someone, or doing or saying something that's just not appropriate.
So is there, and it's a difficult question to answer again, is there one place you've painted, or is there one experience of painting a mural that sort of stands out in mind, either as something that was particularly enjoyable or as something which maybe sort of, has helped sort of, sort of shape your artistic direction in a way as well, maybe?
Yeah, the one that springs to mind was the one in Wales, in a place called Flint, on the back of a cruise ship. It was quite early on in my career. I hadn't really painted many big walls at that point, and I definitely hadn't painted a ship. And it was the middle of winter. It was like November. It was freezing. The ship was dry docked in the estuary of a river, and it was windy and rainy and super cold. And it was like 4 days of, you might say, absolute hell, like nine different layers of clothing on just to try to stay malleable, if you like, to sort of paint. Because when it's cold and you're out there for a certain length of time, your body does start to like seize up. But in spite of all that stuff, I mean, it was a really enjoyable experience. And when I posted the photos or sent them to people like Street Art News, in particular, the guy who runs Street Art News, he literally messaged me back straight away, and he said, that's a game changer. When you're painting things, you don't really consider how good they are or how bad they are. You're just trying to get the job done because that's what you're there to do. And often the impact of those things is not really something that you consider yourself. It's other people that will see it for what it is. And that one definitely sort of changed things for me in a positive way, obviously. But, I think each project in each city, each town, they all have their merits. I mean, I had as much of a good time painting a wall in South Australia where the population of the town was like 400, as I have painting a wall in New York, which obviously has a population of millions. Sometimes it's not necessarily about the wall or the project. It's about the people and the environment and the atmosphere of where you are.
And so, I mean, I don't want to use the P word, but how frustrating is the current situation been in terms of, not being able to travel to these amazing places and have these amazing experiences? Or is it that you have really thrown yourself into, working towards this solo show?
So it was twofold for me. One, I was actually on the road when COVID hit. So I was in California, and I wouldn't say I was stuck in California because it wasn't that much of a hardship, but essentially I stayed in California for an extra sort of 6 weeks or 7 weeks, mainly because I could. My travel visa had an extra 7 weeks on it. So I just stayed there, and I'd been on the road for 8 months. I left London in early September sorry, not in 2020, but 2019. And I didn't get back until the first week of May. So I'd kind of had my fill of traveling anyway. But the one thing I did do was that I decided to do the show in October because mainly of COVID. I'm not a show kind of guy. I've only done one solo exhibition in my whole career. I'm not a fan of it. But the reason for deciding to do it was to take the kind of power away from the pandemic and decide myself what I was going to use the time to do. And so that means that, I've set my mind on doing this show. It's going to take months and months and months. And regardless of whether I'm locked down or just stuck in my studio, it's the same thing. There's very little difference. I do work from home. I always have done. So my day to day is what it's normally like when I'm in London and desperately trying to get work done before I go off on my next trip, because that's essentially what my life is all about. When I'm in London, I don't have a social life really. I'm just in the studio working away. And so that's exactly what I'm doing. But it feels like there's a kind of a positive benefit to me personally from the pandemic, as long as I don't get it, of course. I mean, that would be terrible.
And interesting, actually, this has been a theme with a few artists I've spoken to, and I find it personally quite interesting. Is that I suppose there's almost, particularly if you know if you're doing studio work and this is what you've been doing for such a long time, there's almost a built-in resilience to the way that So I guess, are there any tips any tips that you would that might be applicable to other walks of life from that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this particular lifestyle is unusual. I think most artists are used to isolation anyway, because for most artists, you do have to be isolated in order to maybe do your best work. Me personally, I don't live with my girlfriend, so I don't have anyone with me day to day. I don't have a kid in the house either, so it's a fairly irresponsible lifestyle. You know, I get up when I want, I work as long as I want.
Right.
It doesn't matter if I work late into the evening. It doesn't matter if I skip lunch or I skip dinner. The emphasis for me is always on the work, and everything else takes second place. When I'm on the road, of course, it's slightly different, but when I'm at home in my studio, I don't have anything else other than not necessarily a need to paint, but a want to paint. And it's always the kind of the strongest, what's the word? It's my focus. Nothing else is even comes close to being as important as painting.
And so everything's quite stripped back in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't, when I'm here, I generally don't go out for dinner. I might meet a friend like once a week or something, but it's usually not more than that. I might go out for lunch someday with like a friend locally, but it's few and far between. I kind of already know myself that I'm one of the lucky ones, really, with regards to this pandemic. My life from a day-to-day basis hasn't changed at all. Maybe I don't go out shopping as much as I used to in terms of like shopping for groceries. But other than that, there's no change. I don't rely on government handouts to sort of get me by or anything like that. I don't have any worries, I guess, in terms of what normal people would have. Like my sister has been furloughed for months. Her husband or her fiance has been made redundant already. And of course, those stresses and strains can have impact in other parts of your life as well. And I don't have them. So I know I'm fortunate.
Yeah. And are you in terms of looking ahead again to the solo show in October, are you keeping that fairly under wraps for the time being, or is there anything you're able to sort of share about that in any more?
I've literally been teasing the new artworks all along. It's something I've always done anyway.
Right.
I think it could be frustrating for people this time because, the production for this is sort of 10 months or more. I mean, I've already started painting. I've painted 4 pieces. I'm working on the 5th one now, but there is, in excess of 30 plus pieces for this show. It's like a 2-floor gallery. Main level, which is where you enter, that's going to be the kind of the big pieces and the more traditional stuff. But then downstairs, there's a whole other angle to the show. And we have everything set out and documented about what I'm intending on doing. But actually, I think time will be the main factor of whether I get all of those things done. I don't think I will get all of them done, but I'm hoping to at least kind of like hit the kind of 80% mark. Because I think if I hit the 80% mark, there's going to be enough new angles and new approaches to kind of make people understand that I'm not just that guy who paints Asian girls or geishas, It's, I mean, for me, it's about as interesting as it can possibly be. It's a day-to-day slog to kind of like get yourself up and get yourself in the mood to, crack on with the same piece that you've been working on for 5 or 6 days. I mean, it's not something I've ever looked forward to. The studio work is a means to an end for me. It is essentially the thing that kind of helps me to take a new trip or to
Mm-hmm.
go off to some other country, because I'm not paid to travel, which I think maybe is a misunderstanding that most people think. Um, I don't. I think I can probably count on one hand the number of times I've been paid to paint a mural. I know that's not how other artists operate, but for me, the offer or the lure of money was never going to be the main reason for for painting a mural. For me, there always had to be something else. Yes, the offer of money is nice, but I didn't want to make a decision. Put it this way: if there was no money, it couldn't be a deal breaker. I'd have to consider whatever pros and cons there were to each particular job, and then just decide based on those whether or not it was worth doing. And 99% of the time, I think it is worth doing for me.
And you alluded to there, or you know, in terms of the sort of perhaps some different styles or maybe different approaches for do you have a, without, I don't want you to give away too much, but you know, do you have a kind of clear vision of what you want to do? Are you experimenting a little bit and kind of, you know, you'll work it out a little bit along the way to an extent?
The latter is exactly what I'm doing. So I kind of have an idea of the majority of the images that I'm going to paint, in terms of, you know, the way that I generally work is I'll create a design on the computer by collaging lots of different images together to make up a whole. But then what happens is when I'm painting it, I'm not painting exactly what I'm seeing on the screen. The collaged image is more or less just a sketch. So I know the figure that I'm going to paint. So the piece that's behind you actually is a good example. I think the original Photoshop document was made up of about 6 or 7 different images, if I'm correct on that particular image. But the image on the computer looks nothing like that does on the wall. Nothing like it at all. All I know is that, okay, on that occasion, I'm painting a Japanese girl in a kimono with a pink mask. That's literally the kind of the only thing that's decided
Right.
at the outset. Now, for this particular show, I'm actually, you know, I guess I'm quite lucky in terms of I have a theme. I paint strong-looking women with a paint mask around their eyes, and so that's the theme that runs through everything. But up until now, stylistically, things have changed along the way, but essentially they've stayed the same. Whereas now what I'm doing is stylistically, I'm really starting to change things. And the main theme for the show is actually duality, because what I've sort of touched on a lot in recent work is the fact that, you know, you can paint a woman a certain way, but there's always a side to her that's hidden. And whether that side is, you know, someone who's a badass or someone who's actually emotionally not strong, there's always a different side to it. And what I'm trying to do for this work is I'm trying to kind of, if you like, depict both of those sides. So it's like a diptych, but it's actually joined together and like cut down the middle. So there's a two distinctive sides to each of the portraits.
Sounds intriguing. I'm looking forward to
And there's
to
also different materials. There's different ways of painting. For the first time ever, I'm kind of getting away in a big way from using spray paint. You know, my work is always a mix of acrylic and spray paint anyway, but it has a distinctive style to it in terms of the way I shade. But a lot of the work for this new piece won't be created. Sorry, for the new show, they won't be created in that way. I'm deliberately trying to incorporate not just different styles, but actually the inspirations for those styles as well. So artists who've interested me all my life, I'm trying to, if you like, take my work slightly towards their style without mimicking them or without copying them. I think it's going to be an interesting mix. I'm hoping that, like I said, I'll get most of it done and that everyone will be able to see the kind of the different elements that have made up the new work. I hope. You never know.
It sounds really fascinating, and it sounds like you allowing yourself a bit more freedom of expression in a way, because I suppose, you know, I guess you're known for a particular style, so How's
Yeah,
that process been? I'm interested because
that's
go on.
that is 100% true. So what happened when I came back from California earlier in the year was the reason I had gone off and stayed away for 8 months was I needed a sabbatical. I needed a break because I felt like I was burnt out.
Mm.
And one of the reasons for that burnout was that, I'm traveling. When I get back to London, the only thing on my mind is, okay, I need to get a certain amount of work done before I go off again in, let's say, 4 weeks. And so those 4 weeks are spent in the studio trying to, for the want of a better word, churn out as much work as I can. And within that churning out, there's no room for development. There's no room for experimentation. There's no room for, oh, I'm going to just try this, and I don't care if it doesn't work out, because the time has always been the main factor for me. I never have enough time to do all the things that I want. And so what I did when I got back in May, June, was I stopped working with the gallery that I'd been working with for 6 years. And I needed to do that because I was unhappy with the kind of not the path that I was on, but I was unhappy just like being on that hamster wheel, just continuously going round and round and not really feeling satisfied with what I was with the journey. I'm generally satisfied with the end results. Like I never finish a piece and think, oh, that's shit. I always think, okay, that's good. I would never paint a piece and send it out if I wasn't happy with it myself. I don't have to be 100% happy with it because I'm a perfectionist, and that's not easy to get that kind of like 100% mark. But I'm generally happy with the end result. But the rigmarole of just like day after day of working on the same image and not being particularly interested in the process, that was, I think, sort of getting on top of me. So as well as using the pandemic to make the decision to do a new show, I also knew that stopping working with the gallery meant that I was going to have enough time to try to develop some new work for the show. Now, admittedly, the experimentation for those pieces is generally done on the canvas or on the wood. I don't do test pieces. I've always done exactly the same thing. I have an idea, I'll do a mock-up on the computer, and then I'll just get straight in and start working on it. And 99.9% of the time, it works out not necessarily exactly how I want it, but it works out good enough for me to think, okay, that's fine. I can leave that and I can go on to the next one. I'm pretty sure that the majority of artists are not like that, but my approach to being an artist has always been the same. I'm not afraid of making mistakes, and I'm not afraid of getting something wrong. And I think because of my, if you like, positive approach, I think generally things work out for me. I mean, whatever you want to call that, the universe working for you or whatever, but that's generally how it is for me.
And what about, do you get, a sense of satisfaction from, when people are, rediscovering your works anew, wherever they may be in the world on kind of a regular basis as well?
That's a hard one because, the problem with being, I guess, successful in any walk of life is that if you're listening to the praise, you can often get carried away with that, right. I think once you start believing your own hype, that's a dangerous path to be on. And, for me, the artistic journey in my life has coincided with if you like, a spiritual journey as well. I wasn't happy in my life before I became an artist, and becoming an artist sort of helped me to understand myself better and to understand the world better, I guess, and has made me seek out things that I wouldn't have sought out before. And the silencing of the ego is one of those things that has been part and parcel of that. I don't care for wanting my work on the biggest wall in the most prominent city in the world. It's not interesting to me. I'd much rather paint a piece in a hidden location or somewhere where only a few people are going to see it in the flesh, because the fact of the matter is that nearly everybody will see it on the internet. I try to not ignore the praise, but I try to sort of like take it with a pinch of salt, if you like.
So do you tend to sort of compartmentalize things in terms of this is the project I'm working on now, and then that is, that project's done, and then we're
Yep,
kind of on,
100%.
yeah, right.
I don't really know how to work any other way. I think it's also indicative of the fact that, I work from home. And so my studio is not a massive, massive studio. It's just another room in my house. And so I don't particularly have the room to be working on loads of things all at once. I mean, 100%, I always have lots of things to work on, but I'm generally just working on one painting. All the other stuff I'll be working on, like these sketchbook things that I've been doing. So I'm painting during the day and I'll do the sketchbook at night, or I'll do emails and communications at a certain point in the day, and they don't interrupt the painting. But essentially, as far as the painting is concerned, I'm always just working on one piece, and I have a very strange methodology, I think. I work on the floor for one. I lay the piece on the floor. I have a cushion for my knees, and I essentially just work from the top of the piece to the bottom. And I never go back on myself. I just work from the top down. I'm guessing that must be a sort of a mental thing. That's the same for the approach with a wall.
Mm.
Sometimes when you're painting a wall, you have to work from the top down, because otherwise you get drips or you get splatters on a part that you've already finished lower down. Yeah, so I work from the top to the bottom, and I don't know how the image is going to look when it's finished, but I know when I get to the bottom, I'm finished. I don't second guess myself. I don't change a color. I don't go back on myself. I know lots of artists who are constantly like going back and touching things up or changing this and that. I don't have that. Mine is a very one direction kind of path. It's start here, end here, and know when you're finished.
There's a certain zen to that. I quite like that.
Yeah, and that's again, you see, that's part of the whole path with the spiritual thing as well. Is that, like, for me, art is like a meditation. I'm not concentrating when I'm painting. Weirdly, I mean, I can have full blown conversations with people hands free on my phone while I'm talking, without losing concentration on either the conversation or the work. The painting process has always been meditative for me, and so that is essentially the reason why it's so closely tied with a kind of a spiritual journey, because for me that's what it's always been.
So I was going to say, is that something that's come with time? But it sounds like that's more or less from day one.
Yeah, because like I don't have any art training. I never did even art in high school. But I used to draw a lot as a child, up until my teens, I guess. And when I left school, the intention was always to be a graphic designer. But because I hadn't done art in school, I had no portfolio to speak of. I had no, I hadn't been exposed to different ways of working. I had a certain style of my own, which was I could paint a pretty picture, or I could draw a pretty picture, actually, because I never painted. I could draw a pretty picture, but I didn't really see the validity in that, and I didn't see that that was enough to make a living out of, and I don't think it was enough to make a living out of. But when I started painting 12 years ago, there was if you like, a desperate necessity to do that. I was kind of at the end of being a particular type of person. I was broken at that point, and so getting into painting and specifically getting into stenciling was the thing that kind of helped me to clear my head from all the stuff that I had been thinking and doing before. You get into certain modes of operating as you grow older. You kind of, I think up until your 20s, you're growing and expanding. But once you start getting into your 30s, you're not growing anymore unless you're forcing yourself to grow, in whatever aspect that means, whether it's physicality, mentality, spirituality. It doesn't matter. Unless you're forcing yourself to do it, you're not growing. You're actually decreasing in what's the word? Well, in everything, to be honest. And so getting into the painting for me was my way to force me to be a different person. And fortunately for me, that that leap into that world coincided with a sort of a change of direction in terms of spirituality as well.
And was there a particular point where you thought, yeah, actually, do you know what? I might be able to, this might be me, this I might be able to, you know, make a living from something that I enjoy doing?
You know what? Even that was, I think, the universe kicking me up the ass. So the reason I started painting was because I got a kick up the ass. And I needed to paint to take my mind off what was going on around me. But essentially, I think it was 4 years later, maybe 3.5 years later, I was made redundant from my job. And I didn't want to get another job in that field. And I had been painting on the side for maybe 3.5 years. And the fact that I'd been made redundant and the fact that I got a payout, it meant that I could pay my mortgage for a year. I didn't have a huge amount of money and there wasn't much left for anything else, but I knew that I had a kind of a window of opportunity of 1 year where I didn't have to worry about paying my bills. And so that was what helped me make the decision to become a full-time artist. And the funny thing about that was that I was painting Asian and ethnic women, but I hadn't painted them with the mask on. So the guy I was working with at the time in terms of selling my work, he was telling me to stop painting the Asian girls because he couldn't sell them. His kind of remit was rock star portraits and famous people portraits because he had the clientele who would buy that stuff. But I didn't want to do that because for me, that is not, when you're painting rock stars and famous people and you're essentially painting other people's photographs, that to me is not a career. And I know there are people who do that, but for me personally, I don't see that as a career. And so I needed to do something else. And what happened was him telling me that I needed to stop painting those things coincided with me being made redundant and thinking to myself, you know what, fuck you. I'm going to do what I want and I'm going to make a go of it. And so I went away and I basically thought about, okay, what can I do to make these portraits more appealing, more, what's the word, singular? Like someone can look at that piece and say, oh, that's a FinDAC.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a you know, a well thought out process of, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to make them instantly recognizable? What's going to be the thing that makes them instantly recognizable? And how am I going to go about implementing that? And 2 months later, I painted the first girl with the stripe across the face. And I think it took about another 6 months to a year to kind of hone it into something that was instantly recognizable. And I think eventually over the course of about 3 years, it became exactly what it is now. And it's the same every single time. Every mask is the same shape, has the same little dinkles on them, whatever the drips. It doesn't change now because that is essentially like the brand or the branding.
Yeah, instantly recognizable and really eye-catching as well. And I can actually remember actually seeing your work for the first time, which was at Urban Nation in Berlin. It was one that on the wall outside the headquarters there, and with this kind of I guess sort of pinky purpley dress, green sort of stripe across the face, and just stunning. And I was like, yeah, okay, I need to find out who this artist is immediately. And
I had worked in advertising, but when I worked in advertising, I wasn't a creative. I was a technical person. But I think because I worked so closely with the creative teams, I think a lot of that stuff rubbed off on me. You know, you're getting your branding right and your marketing right, and all of the things that you don't necessarily think about as a creative or as an artist. You know, artists can be temperamental and difficult, and unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, all that stuff that advertising companies do, it works for better or worse. You know, when you see a billboard and it's not something you're interested in, and yet suddenly you find yourself looking at more of them or trying to buy them. I mean, that shit is, it does work. It really does. It's subliminal, you know, subliminal messaging.
Subliminal. And also, I mean, I suppose one thing you're saying before we start the interview about, you know, the appeal for photos was putting it out again, because there does also need to be a
repetition, exactly.
repetition, persistence as well.
Mm.
What is it about, by the way, the sort of the Japanese culture imagery that you find so appealing?
Well, initially, it wasn't necessarily Japanese; it was just the Far East, and it was to do with the fact that the women from those parts of the world generally didn't have a huge amount of positive depictions of them. They were sexualized and objectified more than a little. And because I had previously done a kind of a Sin City style of work, hot girls with guns and tattoos and PVC or leather or whatever it might be. And of course, I've loved Sin City all my life, but it is a tired trope in terms of the way that the women are depicted. And so I was trying to move away from that and soften the look and feel of the work itself. But at the same time, I didn't want to soften the kind of attitude of the women so much. I still wanted them to be strong. I still wanted them to be badass without being sexual, because unfortunately, in the West, being badass is generally tied in with being sexy. And so I just needed to find the kind of the thin line between the two. And the very fact that Asian women didn't have many positive depictions and certainly weren't depicted in a kind of a strong and empowered way, that kind of made the decision for me, really. It has over the years occurred to me that actually whatever ethnicity or culture you're from, as a woman, it seems that there aren't enough positive depictions of women for most women. Whether it's a Black woman or a Brazilian woman or a Dominican woman or a French woman, I just think that the majority of women don't see enough positive depictions of themselves.
Yeah, something which has come up a few times actually in some of the interviews I've done has been not just about imagery but about representation as well, and specifically to do with, there are countless street art festivals all around the world, but not all of them have, let's say, equal representation.
Yeah, well, one of the things for me when I started doing it was that I didn't see any positive depictions of women in street art. I saw a lot of sexualization. I mean, back then there wasn't a lot of female artists anyway. But if a guy painted a picture of a woman, it was always a sexual picture, simple as that. No one was painting pretty pictures of women, and no one was depicting them in a way that they looked empowered and that someone looking at it would feel empowered. So all of those things fed into the reasons for depicting them the way that I did. I still don't think there are enough positive depictions of women, but there are now in street art, there are a lot of, for the want of a better phrase, pretty pictures. There's lots of people painting very fine art looking murals with lots of lovely lighting, and, it's not it doesn't have such a masculine look and feel anymore. There's so much variation now. Whereas when I started, there really, for me, wasn't.
Now, just to change the pace completely now, are you up for a few quick-fire questions?
Yeah, sure, let's do it.
Right, here we go.
The last time I'd done these, they were hilarious, so yeah. Let's knock it out of the park.
Okay. So first of all, spray can or paintbrush?
Oh God, I can't choose between those because they're both inherent in what I do.
Okay. Stencil or freehand?
Has to be freehand now, but there was definitely a time in my life when it was stencils.
Street art or gallery?
Street art, 100%.
Painting at home or abroad?
Abroad, for sure.
And you've already answered this one actually, but I've written it down and I can't think of another one in the moment. So art school or self-taught?
Oh God, yeah, self-taught, 100%.
There we go. And one thing I like to ask as well is just in terms of it could be artists either who you're kind of influenced by or who you're into at the minute and just want to kind of if you think people should be checking out some of their work.
Um, I can't really say that my work has been influenced by any artist. Yes, there are lots of artists who I really love, but the the way that they work and the style of stuff that they produce has had no impact on what I produce whatsoever. I've tried as much as I could to make my work a kind of a singular look and feel. Of course, you're going to be accused of copying somebody or someone somewhere along the way, but for me, that has always been the kind of principal point of departure, to not be like anybody else. The historical artist that I've always loved, Aubrey Beardsley, is the one that springs to mind the most. I'm assuming that's because my parents had a print of his hanging in the house when I was growing up, and in spite of the fact that I didn't know who it was, I think it sort of seeped into my consciousness. Who else? I mean, Francis Bacon, but my work is nothing like his. He doesn't paint pretty pictures. His stuff is quite nightmarish and horrific for the most part. Modern day painters, I mean, Connor Harrington has always been my favorite street art. I mean, for me, he is and always has been head and shoulders above everybody else, both stylistically and technically. But I also love the kind of work like Oji Kawasaki. Who else? Roberto Coni, an Italian artist. There's so many, but I don't really, I don't follow a lot of people online, mainly because I don't want to constantly be seeing things that make me think, oh, maybe I should incorporate that. I need to make sure that the sort of decisions I make for the work that I do should be my own, and they shouldn't be influenced by other people. And, there's enough people out there creating amazing work that makes me think, okay, I need to get better. I don't have to look at them all the time. I just know that they're there, and that sort of spurs me on to kind of push myself as much as I can.
And so is that a constant thing as well, really, that you're always looking to, I suppose you spoke about it a little bit earlier, just that, looking to grow always in one way or another.
Because, the fact of the matter is that I've been painting for 12 years. I haven't got a long history of painting in art school or doing, a master's or university or anything like that. I literally started painting 12 years ago, and I don't really think I've even touched the surface yet. The problem for me is always about the fact that I don't have the time to experiment, and I don't have if you give me a choice of staying at home and painting in the studio or going off traveling and painting a mural, I'm going to be traveling 100% every time. So I don't have the inclination to lock myself in the studio to experiment most of the time. And that can definitely be detrimental to you as an artist. But the last 2 years when I've been on the road, especially in the last 8 months, I mean, I went out of my way to paint murals that were completely different to the stuff I've done before. The problem is that because thematically it's still the same, it's still the portrait of a woman with a face mask, people seem to miss the fact that, okay, this one is completely different to the previous one, or I'm doing certain things with this one that I've never done before. But I've gone out of my way to do my experimentation on the road. I think there's also another reason for that. It's because, when you're in your studio, you can make a mistake, you can paint something terrible, and you can just cover it up and move on. Whereas when you're painting a wall, you can't just leave it. I don't want to walk away from any wall thinking, oh my God, I hate that. I always want there to be some kind of bonus from having painted it in whatever style or however it looks. There has to be a certain level of finesse to it that sort of satisfies me. And I don't, can I think of a wall that I hated? Maybe one. Maybe one. I literally hated it. I didn't hate it at the time, but when I looked back and I thought, oh God, yeah, that looks terrible. But, I think doing it in public is the thing that sort of makes me, forces me to be a better painter.
Mm. No, that's fantastic, and I'm look forward to uh, hopefully coming to the solo show with all things being
Yeah.
equal. You
I mean,
know,
that's the other thing, is that we have to plan for a solo show that can be attended, but may not be able to get it attended at that time,
quite,
because
quite.
anything can change in any sort of short period of time.
Yeah, very much so. And in the meantime, if people want to send their photos, what's the email address?
The email address for the photos for the book is info@findac.art. So FINDAC.art.
I look forward to seeing that when it's
And
out.
of course, any of those photos are much appreciated.
Great. Well, FinDAC, thank you so much. Really, I've just absolutely loved speaking to you. I feel like I could speak to you
Thanks
for
a
a
lot,
lot
mate.
more. Thanks a lot.
Cool. Take care.